Well, I love sports. Now I probably spend more time sitting on the couch watching NFL football than I do getting out there and playing sports. But I used to play a lot as a kid, tennis and basketball. Growing up in Indiana, I loved basketball and went to all the Indiana University basketball games with Bobby Knight, the coach there, that my dad took me to. I love sports, and actually there are a lot of parallels, I think, in sports and playing an instrument. Um, the focus, the psychology of of mastering something. For instance, like shooting baskets, and the way Michael Jordan would often, and others, other great athletes will often talk about being in the zone or visualizing something before it happens. Like Michael Jordan, once he started the process of shooting, he could almost like close his eyes and shoot, and it would go in because he would see it going in before he even shot it. And there's I think with playing the violin, particularly difficult passages, often I will already in my head imagine what it's going to sound like. Imagine sliding into a really difficult note and already hear it in my head before it's happened. And that's the psychological things. And when you do that, it's amazing how much that helps, and
That sounds almost like a Zen process. How much of being on stage, in fact, can be an act of meditation?
Yeah, well, it certainly is a form of that. You're getting into a very focused state. You're eliminating, I guess, like meditation, where you're getting rid of a lot of things, getting rid of things in your brain to make it clear and pure. When you're on stage, you're doing a similar thing. I think I don't notice usually when after a concert people come back and say, "Did you hear that guy coughing? And did you hear that distracting person in the second row?" It's like I usually block that out, and you get very, very, very focused. For me, one of my traits as a person, and sometimes annoyingly to my family and friends, is that when I start to think about something, I completely zone out. So sometimes I'll be pondering something, and people will be waving their hands in front of my face, saying, "Hello, anyone in there?" And that's I think that's in a way, that's also a gift I feel I have, is that I can completely focus on what I'm doing and block everything else out.
Speaking of music as a business, what do you tell young musicians who are, my colleagues included, who might be worried that in addition to major talent, a big career requires a lot of financial backing for the education and then later for PR and advertising? Is there hope for musicians with limited means?
Well, certainly there's when I talk to a young musician about being a musician, I usually don't talk about PR and about the costs of agents and things like that. I think those things are secondary. I think the most important thing is knowing what you want to do. Is it a passion? Is it something that makes your life meaningful? I think life is very short, and we don't get to do it over. And so I always encourage people to follow their dreams, and I tend to focus on that more than being practical, because sure, there are practicalities, but I think when you really believe in something, if you think music is your life, it's got to be your life, I think you're going to find a way to make it happen, and not to focus on big career. That hopefully will happen for whoever wants it to happen, but it's not really about that. It's about getting to do what you love, and whether that's in music, there are many ways to make that happen. You can teach, you can work with young children, which can be very satisfying. You can play chamber music, you can play solo concerts, you can try to be the center of the stage, or you can try to be the person that's important but in a more supporting role. And there are many ways to create a career, but and there are also people out there that want to help. And you have to look for those people. My parents found people like that for me. They couldn't afford when I was 10 years old, I found a 3/4 size violin here in New York. I didn't live here, but we came to New York. Jacques Francais, the legendary violin dealer at the time, had this 3/4 size violin for $4,000, which was a lot of money for my parents. They couldn't afford it, or they could have. Looking back, I'm kind of annoyed that they didn't just buy it for me, but they thought that was so out of reach. So, but they found somebody that ended up buying it for me and helping me out, for me to use, and he ended up being a kind of a patron. And then later on in life, I had other instruments that were lent to me, and people that supported me because they enjoyed being behind the scenes and helping young musicians. And there are ways to get support financially, but the first thing is just to know that that's what you want to do. If a kid comes to me and says, I want to have a big solo career, that's kind of not the way to enter into it. You have to, it has to be a calling just to play music first.
You're now the owner of the famous Hubermanstrad.
Yes.
And that is a very storied instrument that was stolen twice and recovered twice before you bought it. But what I actually wonder is it equally important to have a great bow for your sound?
Well, the bow is, it's a huge part of the equation, having a great bow. They don't come, you don't buy them together. Bows sold separately. And they were made, this violin was made in 1713 by Antonio Stradivari in Italy, in Cremona, Italy. This bow was made in the very early 19th century in France by the sort of Stradivari of bow makers, you might say, Francois Tourt. Yes. And he kind of sort of reinvented the bow, which is remarkable because the bows used to be shaped more like the Baroque bows were shaped in a different way, more like a bow and arrow, and as music evolved, bows started to evolve with them, and Tourt was one of the innovators of the bow, which is remarkable because he got it so right that people today, it's the most sought after bows. And the most valuable. And it completely changes the sound, how it works with the instrument and the overtones and the flexibility and the way. The bow is for a singer, this bow is your breath. What you do with it is the nuance, everything you do with your sound musically, it all comes from this. And so it's very important.
I think what most people don't realize is that in some cases the bow might be more expensive than a given instrument.
It's possible. In this case, this bow is certainly, it's worth more than my house in Indiana. This violin is worth more than my house in New York City. But it can be very, very valuable and very expensive, but so worth it for a concert artist. When I found this bow, I just found this about 6 months ago. This particular one, I fell in love with it, and